All right. There we go. We are now live. I am here. I'm going to go ahead and bring Jeff in as well. Let's see. Okay, now we've got Aaron and Jeff. Turn on
On the
titles.
air. I'm in the broadcast.
You are in the broadcast. Fantastic. We've got titles. Good deal. We are live. All right. I feel like we've entered this phase of navel gazing with Zoom over the last few years where we have to get used to seeing ourselves. It's even worse when you're live streaming because you're also, it's like, is it really live? It is really live. So we will get going here. We are talking all about photography and AI. We've got some questions that have come in advance for folks that are tuning in the chat room. Feel free to drop questions there as well. Kind of flexible on this. We'll see how it goes, what comes up, what doesn't come up. But I was thinking we would probably chat for, I don't know, half an hour here or so. So, I don't know. Let's start off with kind of the burning question. I've heard varieties of this both online and offline for the last, I don't know, couple of years, right? I mean, it was a year and a half ago that I published my book on photography and artificial intelligence. And ever since
What is that book
then,
called?
what is that book called? That book is called The Computer Ate My Photos. In fact, I will drop a link in the chat here in just a moment in case anybody wants to hop right over to Amazon and make a purchase, either Kindle or paperback version. But
Awesome.
do your clients care about this as a photographer, right? Like, who cares if you're using AI? Is that really going to make you better at business? What's your take on that, Jeff?
Well, okay, that's a big question. And I should probably say, like the few clients that I have, photo clients, it's a little bit harder for me to address that because like I have some photo clients, but not a whole bunch, because I'm mostly writing about this and writing books and articles and what have you. But you know, I guess if you are a professional photographer, the question is, where can these things help you? Because I mean, there's a whole lot of hype. There's a whole lot of, oh, geez, generative AI is coming and it's going to, take my job, or it's going to change things in big ways. And all that is just a great big question mark. We don't know what's going to be happening with all that yet, and that's why we're paying attention to it, and that's why we are trying to, get a pulse of what these technologies are being used for. But if I'm looking at this as I'm a professional photographer and maybe I'm doing, event photography or portrait photography or, basically any kind of photography, how can I use these technologies to help me? And I mean, it's a huge field. One of the
Mm,
things that I think we've both been trying to do is talk about all the different ways that AI and machine learning
right.
are affecting photography. It's not just I can type a few words in text and get a beautiful, food photography shot for, my website or whatever. I mean, that's like this much, like a tiny sliver of what's been possible. So I look at more in terms of, if I have, let's say, software that will allow me to take a wedding shoot and cull that down into the
Mm-hmm.
best photos, based on, for example, like which things are in focus, which ones have people looking at the camera, which ones have people with their eyes open. These are things that can be done now, and that could save you, 2 or 3 hours of culling. If you have, let's say,
I,
a weekend's worth of 6,000 photos to go
mm-hmm.
through,
Yeah,
that
that
makes a big difference.
that was one of the first things that I feel like, you know, moved beyond just the, oh, this can give me a cool new effect in my favorite AI photo editor was, and it was probably, I mean, it might have been approaching a year ago now. I'll find a link and I'll drop it in the description when this republishes on YouTube. But I did had a conversation with Justin Benson from Aftershoot, which was
Yeah.
one of the first, if not the first, photo culling applications out there using artificial intelligence. And Justin is a working wedding photographer. He lives in the northeast part of the U.S. And, he talked about how he routinely would come back from a wedding with 3,000, 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 images between him and his additional shooters if he had multiple photographers. And that used to take him half a day or a day just to cull those photos and decide which ones he's then going to further edit. And it's not any fun either, right? Like nobody became a photographer because they wanted to cull photos,
Yeah.
maybe you like the editing part, but nobody likes the culling part. And so
No.
Aftershoot can go through and there's other players in this space now. Imagine AI has added photo culling capabilities to its system, but it can go through and find, okay, here are the ones that obviously have problems, right? They're out of focus. You clearly had the lens cap on. Whatever the case may be. These ones are like exact duplicates. But it can also go through and use a bunch of algorithms to identify the photos that it thinks are going to have the most impact on the viewer for a variety of reasons, and find those selections where maybe you feed it 4,000 images and it comes back and says, hey, here are the best 500, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if it can do that in 45 minutes as opposed to 4.5 hours while you're off doing something else for that 45 minutes, that's that's money to a professional photographer, right? Either you can engage in another revenue producing activity in that half a day that you just saved, or you can use that time with your family or doing something entirely non-photography related, but it's time you weren't spending working anymore.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think
Well, and
I was going to say you hit a key point in that there's a lot of different places where AI is intersecting with photography. Culling is one of them. It's not just AI image generation.
yeah. So I was going to add on to that oftentimes, I mean, my impression, and I should probably say, I've never been a wedding photographer. It honestly scares the hell out of me because it's a completely different beast than I think
Right.
a lot of photography. Just the pressure and the timelines. But I am seeing that there are a lot more people who are offering faster turnarounds, or even we're going to shoot your wedding, and by the time the last guest goes home, you're going to have like a preliminary selection
Mm-hmm.
of the best shots, so that the next day the bride and groom, they wake up and they can just sort of revel in how great of a day it was.
Right.
Well, this is going to allow that to happen. Now, you might be thinking, all right, as a wedding photographer, I've spent 16 hours on my feet and doing all this capture and all of the energy that it takes to do that, and now you want me to also do the culling and the initial editing and all of that. So this would allow you to do that, even if it's just here are 20 of
Mm-hmm.
the most promising shots, and then in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, you'll get
Right.
all the finals, right? But this could be something that, because you have this tool, that
Mm-hmm.
is like an extra thing that you can charge for. That is an extra
Right.
service that you can give without thinking that, okay, I'm going to grab something really quick to eat, and then I'm going to be up until 3 o'clock in the morning to get this turnaround, and
Right.
then you're just fried, right?
Right. And I have
Nobody
run
wants to
into
do that.
that. I was gonna say I've run into that. I don't photograph weddings. I did a few many years ago, enough to know that that wasn't going to be my thing. But I do
Right.
other events, corporate events, conferences, trade shows. I did one just a few weeks ago, a company's annual sales awards banquet dinner kind of a thing. And with a lot of these types of events, one of the things that has changed in the time that I've been doing event photography professionally, which I started in 2008. So I guess, gosh, was that 15? I guess that's 15 years now. In 2008, everybody was happy to have the photos in, a couple weeks. In 2023, they want some photos right away or the next day because they want to put them out onto social media. And depending on the scale of the event, even for a smaller scale event, they may not have a live social media team at the moment, but they want a few photos that they can have, the next morning to put up on their social media or to put onto their website or to send out with a press release. And, to be able to come back from an event where, even if I just have, 200 or 300 photos, to be able to quickly find, hey, here are a few great ones, get those to the client so they've got 5 they can use on social media right away. And then, yeah, I deal with the other couple 100 or 300, in the coming days. It's one of those things where it lets me provide that value with less manual work on my part. Because, yeah, previously it'd be like, okay, well, I'm going to come home, I'm tired, and now I'm going to sit at the computer for a few hours and go through this manually. So, and you have to be able to do that, right? I mean, that's kind of table stakes now if you're going to be in that market. You can't be like, hey, I'm going to come photograph your event, but you can't have any photos for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Social media and real-time image sharing are a thing, whether you like it or not. And so you have to find a way to provide that service. And you can either do it manually with a lot of intensive effort on your own part, or you can use some technology to help out.
Yeah.
So,
Absolutely.
yeah, I think that, your client doesn't care that you're using artificial intelligence, right? Like, it gets back to that whole features versus benefits thing, like that anybody in sales will talk about, right? Generally, the buyer doesn't care about the feature; they care about the benefit, right? Your client doesn't care that you're using artificial intelligence as a photographer. What they care about is the benefit that it's going to mean. You're going to be able to get them their images faster, or you're going to be able to do some cool things with their images that you couldn't have done 10 years ago because the technology to do that wasn't invented. Whether it's done
Yeah.
with AI
Yeah.
or done manually, they're not, most of them won't really care about that detail.
Well, one of the things that I keep running into is that idea, and honestly, like this has been the case ever since I, started using computers, started writing about computers, is that we get really focused on the cool stuff, the cool things that it can do, right? It can make, this complete fictional scene with very little work, and where you can, do good compositing, blah, blah, like all sorts of examples. But I think we forget about the whole idea of having a computer. And maybe this dates me too much, but the whole idea was like the computer is going to make my life easier somehow.
Right.
It's going to do something for me. And whether that's, the robot bringing you drinks in your Jetsons apartment, or with technologies like this, think of the areas that are just sort of uh, that are drudgery. Okay. Now,
Right.
we talked about culling, but also in the editing sphere. Let's say you've done a portrait session and you have, maybe several hundred pictures of somebody, a couple different outfit changes, maybe a couple of different locations if you're doing an environmental portrait, and you want to apply an edit that's going to be consistent throughout.
Right.
So one of the ways you can do that is you can take advantage of the fact that these AI tools, what they are really good at is identifying things, and especially people, because it's been trained on people for a
Right.
long time. So what I absolutely love, and I know that sounds like hyperbole, but the first time I did this, it blew my mind, is you can take one of those portraits and you edit it. So let's say you want to, you know, brighten the person's face a little bit. You want to add a little bit of contrast to the eyes to make them sparkle, maybe like a tiny amount of skin smoothing to make it look more flattering, darken the background so that there's a little bit more separation, like those kind of things.
Mm-hmm.
And you get to a shot and you really like how it turned out, and you want all the other shots to look the same. But the problem is, unless you have, a model who is just not moving, then
Right.
when you compare all those different frames, like you can batch change a lot of that stuff. You can,
Right.
your general tones and all of that. But when it comes to the specific,
Right.
you don't want to have to go in and be like, okay, now I got to go select the person or paint a mask or whatever.
Right. The
And
eyes
now
have
with
moved
tools,
between shots as somebody's moved their head up. Yeah. I mean, yeah.
yeah, exactly. Or, they've turned to the side or whatever. And it used to be that like maybe you could copy the mask, but then that lightened area would be like off to the side of their head
Right.
because it,
Right.
it just, duplicated the pixels. Well, now using, I mean, you can do this in Lightroom, you can do this in Luminar, in all sorts of things that will allow you to select a subject. You just say, I want to copy these edits throughout this whole set, and it
Right.
will go and do the person selection and then apply all those things to those masks. So that person will always be consistently edited based on that first shot. And I mean
Right.
that right there, that's an hour saved easy depending on what you're working on.
Right. And one of the cool things that, and I think maybe we'll loop back to a question of like, how do you find the time and how much time should you spend learning all this stuff as it comes out? But one of the cool things just this week, I think it was just yesterday, that Adobe released its latest round of updates for the photography applications. And so, new version of Lightroom, Camera Raw, all that just came out. Um, One of the things they did is they enhanced the AI masking capabilities again, which has been a pretty regular thing for them for the last year or so. About quarterly, as they release new versions of Lightroom, they're adding new AI masking features, and they also have their AI presets, the adaptive presets that they have now, and you know, one of the things that I was looking at, and I was reading an article from Kirk Tuck earlier today, and I'll drop a link to that down below for the replay as well, is that, you know, I think a lot of people, unless you go in to play around with this, you don't necessarily fully appreciate what some of this stuff does. And, Kirk was looking, and his example in this blog post I was reading was that, he went in and applied one of these adaptive portrait presets on an image that he'd made, and it goes in, and the AI made, I think it was 7 different masks automatically based on the person in the portrait. It identified their eyes, their hair, their clothing. Clothing masking is one of the new features that just came out this week in Lightroom, along with facial hair masking. So we can finally get rid of that gray in our beards if we want to, with Lightroom selecting it automatically. But Lightroom goes in and creates all of these masks for you. And yes, it uses AI to do what it thinks it needs to do. But as a photographer, you have control of that. You can work with those same masks, you can add additional masks of your own. And so, I feel like one of the things where sometimes presets or clicking that auto button or that magic wizard, that magic wand icon, sometimes just have the application do its magic and make things awesome, is that, it's not always awesome. Sometimes it gets it pretty close, but not quite. And I feel like how Adobe has implemented these adaptive presets with Lightroom is a good example of using AI to get you maybe 90% of the way there, or 95% of the way there. But then we can go in and tweak things, right? So, that's something that I think people maybe didn't fully understand, or, I know I didn't fully understand or appreciate until you really get into play with it, because you just think, oh yeah, it uses AI and does some masking stuff and applies a preset. It's like, well,
Yeah.
yeah, but now you've got the ability to really make that your own. And so, how much time is this all
Yeah.
going to take us to learn?
Well, and some of this too, I think, is because, I mean, I don't know your experience, but I've always sort of like thought of presets as this sort of dirty word
Right.
because like for a long time presets are like, hey, here's how to make your photos look just like mine. And I'm like, well, I don't want my photos to look just like yours, or I don't want my photos to look like they were dragged in some sort of, dirty processing fluid that,
Right.
makes it all grungy and cool. Um, and it wasn't until fairly recently, I mean, like a couple of years ago, when I realized that, presets are not just to give something a look, they are automation. They're a way to, uh, not only do something from the outside, but like the example that I gave, working on a portrait, you could just as easily turn that into your own personal preset. And so, like I always want the background to be darkened, and that is something that you can just save and then, apply that, and
Hmm.
then go back through and adjust all those little different pieces. And I think what people were getting hung up on that blog post, which was a really good post, was, the preset part of it, because people were like,
Right.
"Oh, I don't think it would be, like the color of her skin wasn't good, so the software is messing that up." And he pointed out that actually that was on him. He
Right.
did the actual, adjustment on that. So, like, some of the presets will try to make things look a certain way, but with these adaptive presets, they will apply things. Like, I think for the enhance eyes,
Hmm.
I want to say it increases exposure by like 5, and it, increases contrast by like
Right.
15 or something. And you can just go in and change those. What blows my mind about all this is, I think we're going to be like the last generation of photographers who remembers that if you wanted to mask somebody, and if there was like hair that you had to deal with, like that was a multi-step, multi-layer Photoshop
Right.
expertise job, just to make sure that, little wisps of hair get
Right.
caught correctly. And you can literally click one button now, and it gets those, and it gets them really good.
Right, right. Yeah, yeah, we're of the generation where like you would probably, if that was something you did a lot, you probably bought additional software. You
Mhm.
probably paid for a plugin that did nothing other than masking to help you do masking better because it was difficult to do manually.
Yeah,
And
and time consuming.
yeah, and time consuming, right? Yeah, yeah. And now with these presets, it's saving us time, and this is where, you know, as we go back to, do your clients care about this? It's like, no, your client for that shoot, whether it's a high school senior portrait or whether it's a commercial job, they don't care that you used AI masking when you were cutting that subject out of the background and putting it onto something different for whatever you were doing. They don't care whether you used AI masking, but what they might care about is that, it only took you 5 minutes and not 5 hours to do that piece of work,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And
Or
so,
on the other side of that is, they might think it took you 5 hours, and that's okay to let them think it took you 5 hours,
right.
because then you've just made some money and not done the amount of work that you used to have to do. So,
Right, right. And that's kind of one of those things. And, not to dive deep into photography, the business side of things, right? But, are you charging your clients by the hour, or are you charging them based on the value that you're providing to them, right? I mean, a lot of these AI tools can help you provide that same amount of value or more value in less time. And if it's still that great amount of value, it still has that commercial viability in the market. So,
yeah, definitely.
and I guess, you're someone who, you're a photographer, you're a writer, you write about photography professionally. You obviously try lots of new AI editing software, AI image generation. You put this stuff through its paces, so that you can learn about it and write about it. If someone isn't a professional writer writing about photography and AI, I think there's a very real question that comes up of, wow, there's all this new stuff that's coming out every week, right? I mean, you and I both, we both have like weekly email newsletters where every week we're sharing something new in the photo AI world. If someone is whether they're just like a serious hobbyist photographer or a working professional photographer, how much do they need to be on top of this, right? Do they need to be trying every new thing that comes out? Is it okay to sit back and wait and see how things go? I mean, everybody has their own personal comfort on, do they want to be on the bleeding edge or, somewhere in the mainstream, or, are they someone who upgrades, last and late? What's your take on how much effort should photographers put into learning this?
No, that is a great question because like I'm sure we know people on both ends of the spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
People who are like they're gonna try the brand new thing and see what it does the very first day. Um, to bring Lightroom back as an example, another thing that they announced was a new AI based denoise
Right.
um, uh,
Right.
tool.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, one of the podcasts that I do, Photo Active, with Kirk McElern, we talked about this in our last episode that's going to be coming out next week. That we recorded it yesterday, and part of what came up was, how often does this really come up? How often is this a need? And some of that was, you know, based on what Kirk shoots and what I shoot. Um, but you know, are people clamoring for
Mm-hmm.
the ability to get rid of noise in their images?
Right.
And I
Well, we've
think
already got
like
lots of noise tools, right? I mean, Lightroom already has its own noise tools. There's, noise plugins. Topaz has one, On1 has one. Like, do we need
right.
another noise tool?
Well, sort of, yes. I mean, like specifically for Lightroom, like the manual tools that were there are still
Right.
there. Um, and this one is much better because the manual ones have always been, hey, if you want to, we will get rid of your noise and give you this nice, blurry, steamy
Mm-hmm. Right. We
thing
got rid
that
of your
kind of
noise
resembled your
and all your
your
detail
first one.
too.
Yeah, exactly. Your details are going to be gone, but don't worry about that.
But there's no
Um,
noise.
uh, so like these technologies are very cool, but how often is it going to come up? And what was interesting is Kirk and I were going through our libraries. We actually spent an hour just talking about this before we recorded, trying to find good examples. And for him, he had to go back to old iPhone
Mm.
uh, 5 pictures, which are sort of problematic in all sorts of ways
Right.
anyway. Um, and I mean, obviously, the answer was we're such good photographers now that we don't have to
Right.
worry about,
Right.
right?
Of course. I'm sure
But
that was it. Yeah.
actually, yeah, I'm sure that was it. But like the ones that I found were lots of edge cases, but they were things like event photography, where
Mm-hmm.
you're in dark rooms, you're in
Right.
in dark conference rooms, and so you're gonna push that ISO up and it, add noise to it. And so then it depends on what you're shooting with and whether you're like how newer cameras can handle noise, um, or you're a bird photographer. Again, you're cranking up the ISO so that you can get really really fast shutter speeds, and then you just end up with noise. And these apps can do a really good job of getting rid of it. So what was my point there? My point was that um, uh, like I think that the tools are very cool. And what's nice is that with, I think, pretty much all of these, you have the means to test them out.
Mm-hmm.
If you're in the Adobe ecosystem, you're going to get this as a free upgrade anyway. It might be something that you never need to play with, but you can do it. You can apply it to some. Maybe you have some older images that are noisy.
Right.
Um, but like tools like Topaz denoise, on one has a no noise
Hmm.
AI app, and so like you could try all these and see if it's something that fits for the types of photos you're doing and
Hmm.
your workflows. And I don't think that necessarily has to be a situation where you're sitting down and you're like, all right, I'm going to spend this whole weekend and get up to speed on
Right.
photography and AI, because you can just sort of nibble at these things, see what appeals to you, look at your images, see what they need. Maybe your images need denoising. Maybe it's just not even on your
Hmm.
radar, and that's fine.
Yeah, and I
So,
think, yeah, I think that's a good example. And I also think as you look at as a photographer, how much attention should you pay to this? How much time should you spend on it? What tools should you check out? I mean, I would say unless I would say if you're checking out every single new thing that comes out with AI as it comes out, I hope you're having fun because that probably doesn't make business sense doing that,
no.
unless you're professionally into this stuff. All that said, I think you really hit on it with the denoise example. Is which of these tools solve problems that you're having, right? Whether,
Mhm.
event photographers with noisy images in dimly lit hotel ballrooms is a fantastic example that, I'm very familiar with myself. The wedding photography culling things that we talked about near the beginning of the show, are another good example, right? I mean, if you're a photographer who routinely spends more time than you'd like to spend culling images, it would probably behoove you to look at Aftershoot, to look at Imagine, to look at these AI culling programs and see if one of them is a good fit for you that can help solve that problem that you have. Now, if you're a hobbyist fine art photographer and you come back from a shoot and you've got 3 great images from that shoot that you want to print big, then yeah, you probably don't need AI powered culling software.
Right, right.
But look for the tools that solve the problems that you have, whether that's culling, whether that's replicating edits like you talked about, where yeah, great, I've edited this portrait and now I want to automatically edit the other ones from the same shoot. You know, look for the pain points that you have, right? You don't want to use, I mean, you don't want to be using AI just for the sake of using AI, but you want to be, no more than you would want to use any piece of photo software just for the sake of using photo software, right? So
Right.
I think that kind of really is the practical side of it, right? Is, can it help you? Well, then, yeah, maybe you should pay attention to it. Is it something
Yeah.
that's out there? I mean, if you do all your work inside a studio, sky replacement probably is not going to be really big on what you care about, and that's okay.
Exactly. Well,
So,
it's also, I think, what's very cool about all these is that it's injecting a lot of new stuff into digital photography. And I know that digital photography isn't necessarily old, but it's kind of old in the sense of, like we've been making
right,
photos digitally, and now, I mean, honestly, even just listening to myself, I'm saying digital photography. We just say photography now,
right.
unless we're specifically saying film photography. But I think it's making photography exciting in the sense that you're being able to do things now easier and faster than you could before, because like for example, you mentioned sky replacement. Now there are reasons for doing that, artistically. Maybe you went to go shoot a waterfall and the sky was just garbage, but
Mm-hmm.
everything else was really cool. Maybe you're a real estate photographer and you need
Right.
to replace that sky, whatever. um, Before, you would either have to maybe hire that out or you'd have to do it in Photoshop. And I think for a lot of photographers, that climbing that Photoshop wall is a big deal, because now suddenly you're like, you're dealing with layers, and you're dealing with having to, go on YouTube or buy books and figure out
Right.
how to do all this stuff that the AI tools are now just able to do easily. So you can end up, doing interesting creative things that maybe you would not have done before because it was too much of a hurdle. Um, I don't think any of this experimentation is bad. Like, it's not going to hurt you. It
Right.
just depends on how much time you want to sink into it. And maybe there's something that's super cool about it that really sparks something in you in terms of photographically, and maybe it's just like something that's kind of happening over here, and I'll deal with it if I find a need in my images from last
Mm-hmm.
weekend.
Yeah, I think that's all a solid take because, yeah, I mean, if you're doing it for fun, if you just want to play around for fun, great, go for it, right? Like you said, there's no harm in that. I mean, the worst that might happen is you spend a bunch of time with a tool or a technique and you're like, yeah, I'm never going to use this. But at least now you know that, right? And, you
Yeah.
won't be wondering later, well, I wonder if I wonder if I should have gotten into that, whatever that app was or whatever that technique was that everybody was talking about.
Yeah.
you know, but yeah, if you're doing it as a business, figure out if it makes business sense because some of it will and some of it, maybe even most of it won't. So,
Well, and I want to make one more point on this. Um, you know, Before AI started to become more prominent, it's not like we weren't able to make images.
right.
It's not like everything before 2018 is garbage because we didn't have AI to do cool things. So that's part of it. And the other part is, at least so far, I don't feel like there's any of this where if you are a photographer and you don't know it, that you're being left behind, or you I don't think you're going to
Right.
run into a situation where somebody says, "Oh, but do you know how to do AI based culling?"
Mm-hmm.
And then suddenly you're like, "Oh my gosh, I overlooked that. I'm out of the mainstream now. I,
Right.
I I don't know what's going on," because these are all like little additive pieces that solve specific problems rather than being a photographer and having somebody say, well, do you know how shutter speed works in aperture? And if you're like, no, I never learned that, then maybe that's something that you are behind on. But that's really not a realistic case.
Right, because your clients, I like that we keep coming back on the same themes, but like your clients aren't
Yeah.
coming to you saying, "Hey, I need to hire you for sky replacement," right? They're coming to you because they're like, "Hey, I need a cool architectural image of this new office building we just built." Now, part of that is that we want a nice sky in it, but there's any number of ways you can do that. And, you know, as you said, pretty directly, on one of our previous videos that we did a couple weeks ago, and I'll link below for the replay, of course. AI gives you a set of tools, right? And if you have these tools in your tool chest, they are options that are available for you to use. You're not going to use any one of those tools on every single photo. A lot of the tools you will only use on a minority number of your photos when, you have something that really needs that type of attention, right? Whether it's a sky replacement or a portrait retouch or whatever that may be. I feel like being aware of the tools that are out there is a good thing, even if you don't necessarily use them all the time.
Definitely.
Because you're competing in a market with people that do. And, maybe you want to do something manually, or you are doing something manually because you haven't chosen to, or you aren't aware of a tool that'll let you do it much more efficiently. That doesn't mean your resulting image is going to be any worse. It just means you're going to get to that resulting image in a different way.
Yeah.
And, everybody has their own level of comfort with how they pick up new things versus, there are people that switch camera systems every few years and buy all new lenses and learn entirely new camera menus because that camera brand does something that they think is important better than the last brand they use. There are also
Yeah.
people that have used the exact same camera brand for 25 years and they've upgraded within that line because that's what they're comfortable with and they can solve the problems that way. And both of them are right as long as they're producing the images they want to produce. So
Yeah. Yeah.
we
All
have
right.
gone. What were you going to say, Jeff?
Oh, well, I was going to say, looking at our questions, there something that kind of follows on to that is, there was a question that says that this is all changing so fast.
Right.
And are we learning things that'll be out of date quickly? And that I can absolutely get behind as a good question, because it does feel like we've suddenly had to keep up with a lot. And I think that's also because, I mean, maybe it's just because we look at this field, but it seems like the last, say, month or two, suddenly it's just AI this and AI that, in popular news, not just in
Right.
sort of, photographic circles. Like suddenly we're talking about, Mid-Journey and generative AI and all that. So, I mean, since I read the question,
Yeah.
I'll pass that back to you. Are we learning things that are going to be out of date quickly? Am I going to spend a whole lot of time learning how to,
Right.
do sky replacements, and then I'm not going to need it because Photoshop will just be like, oh, it looks like there's a sky. I've got a better one for you. Boop.
Right. Yeah. I think, are you learning things that are going to go out of date quickly? I think a lot of that depends on how close to that bleeding edge you are. I think the nature of, if you're someone who's right on that edge, if you're someone who is that early adopter who tries a ton of new stuff that comes out, part of the risk of that, one of the main downside of that is that you end up spending your time with a bunch of stuff that doesn't catch on or gets replaced, right? And we're not, whether we're talking about AI or anything else, right?
Yeah.
Is that, lots of stuff gets released to the market and lots of it doesn't catch on. And so if you are trying every new thing that comes along, a lot of those things that you tried are things that are never going to become mainstream. That's one aspect on it. I think the other aspect is, is it going to become out of date too quickly? And I think some of that depends on how mature these things are as they start getting released and hitting the market. I know that some of, so for example, with the generative AI stuff, so, you mentioned Mid-Journey, right? That has gone through several iterations of its model. Same thing with, with OpenAI, with, and dall-e, Stable Diffusion, all of these things. The earlier ones were kind of rough. The work they produced was very interesting because it was an entirely new kind of field for most people, but it was also not on a level that it was going to clearly replace a lot of human generated stuff. As we've gotten closer to where we're at now, the quality of the work has gone up. The user interfaces have gotten better. I think it's interesting with Adobe Firefly that was released, a month ago or so. Adobe put its user experience and user interface smarts into that. And so it has a much more user-friendly, polished interface, even just in its web interface. And I would expect as they integrate that into their Creative Suite applications, Photoshop, Illustrator, things like that, they're going to find ways that it will natively match those user interfaces that, photographers already know Photoshop, illustrators already know Illustrator. If you wait for some of this stuff to get more mainstream, so like, for example, if you haven't done any generative AI stuff yet and you wait for it to show up in Photoshop before you start learning it, you're going to have a smoother experience in knowing that once you learned it in Photoshop, it's going to be pretty solid. Now by the time that shows up in Photoshop, which I still stick by my guess that it's probably going to be at Adobe Max this fall when they release that as part of the
Probably.
creative suite. You know, by October 2023, if that's when that happens, you'll have missed out on about 18 months, I would say, of fairly mainstream generative AI. Now, is that causing your photography business to go out of business in that time? No, not at all. Have you maybe missed some opportunities if you really wanted to get out there and experiment with some stuff that would get some attention or catch some eyeballs because it was new and interesting? Maybe. But, you know, that's not necessarily the right thing for everything. And so I think, you know, photography in a broader sense has changed fairly rapidly in the last 15, 20 years. You know, if you're still using only the tools that existed in Photoshop 10 years ago, you're missing out on a lot of cool stuff, AI notwithstanding. You know, if you've learned those new tools, you can keep using those new tools. They haven't gone away even when, you know, some stuff has been replaced.
Yeah.
What's your take? I mean, is it worth learning something when we know that something better will be out in 6 months?
Well, you bringing up the generative AI stuff that's exactly where I was thinking about this because, you know, at least from like my personal experience, I did not dabble too much in the early dall-e, Midjourney, Stable Diffusion, and part of that was because there was a definite hurdle to doing so. I mean, you had to, you know, get access to it. You had to join a Discord server. You had to, or yeah, I mean, like you still
Right.
have to. You know, you go into Discord and you type prompts into basically a giant, you know, room
It's a
where other
command
people are
line
also doing
interface,
it.
right?
And
It's like you're
it's yeah,
typing in MS-DOS or in Linux. You're giving text commands to
exactly.
your computer again. It's like, didn't we move past this 25 years ago? Like, anyway.
And so, well, no, I mean that's exactly it. And so, you know, I felt like I didn't have, you know, the arcane knowledge to do it right. I mean, I was able to make some things,
Right.
but I didn't have the sophistication of it, and it was frustrating. It was just you know, genuinely frustrating. When Adobe released Firefly, now Firefly is, you know, a few steps behind in terms of quality and what it can do compared to these other tools, but it is so user friendly that it's just very obvious, like, here, type your thing in this very obvious text box,
Right.
and if you want some options, there's a panel on the side. You could say, I want it to be a photo and I want it to have, you know, I want it to be backlit. And it's like that user friendliness to abstract away all the technical stuff that's going on behind, I think makes a huge difference. So people who do want to get their feet wet in this, when they have access to Firefly, it's still a beta. I think they're still, you know, like you have to kind of apply to do it. But that will be a much easier entrance if you are not like programmatically
Right.
thinking, right? So that's a perfect example of, you know,
Yeah, it's one of those things
go ahead.
where
Yeah.
if you learned the old way to do it, if you learned the command line interface,
Mhm.
it probably served you well. But
Right.
the fact that now there's going to be probably a more user-friendly graphical interface on top of that doesn't hurt you in any way. And in this specific example, I think if you're the kind of person who was into that, you're not going to be unhappy that it changed.
Right.
You know, a lot of this has to do with how much of a tech person are you, right? Like,
Right.
you know, because we are talking about, I mean, AI technology, and by its nature, it is tech stuff. And a lot of it will get made into very friendly user interfaces and easy to understand options in our software and things like that. But it's still tech. And I think if you're going to be successful in photography in 2023, you have to have at least somewhat of a tech side, you know, like the whole, like, well, I'm not really a computer person. It's 2023 and you're a
Guess what? You
photographer.
are.
You kind of need to be a computer person or you're probably not going to do well as a photographer. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, I think that's a good take. And I think, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, like, another really good example is like, look at portrait photography.
Mm-hmm.
If you needed to retouch a portrait, you would go into Photoshop, and there were lots of different ways to do that. You would, create multiple layers. You'd blur a layer and then mask it, and then paint so you could get smoother skin, and then use different masks and blends to retain the texture, like all of that. Like, it was a big deal. Now you can go into Lightroom or Luminar or any of these, and use the retouching the portrait features, and it will smooth the skin. It'll make the eyes better. Now the question is, do they do those as good or better than the other ways? And I think that for people who learned how to do the retouching at sort of the Photoshop level, to speak really broadly, like the old ways, um, I think those people still have a leg up, because
Mm-hmm.
they will know how to do probably a better job than what Lightroom will do. Lightroom is really good for like general portrait, make somebody look a little more flattering, but there are always going to be circumstances where you need to go in with the clone tool, and you really need to take advantage of other different methods rather than just the automatic one, because the automatic one works for 90% of the people. And there
Mm-hmm.
are some cases where, that 10%, that knowledge that you built up before, is where you're going to, excel or have an edge over somebody who doesn't know how to do that. That's why I think, if you have like a professional retoucher, a woman named Lisa Carney, if you're familiar with her work, amazing stuff.
Right.
And I believe like she can run circles around any AI that you throw at her. Um, Please don't throw things at Lisa. She's wonderful. But like she has that talent. And for some situations, some clients, like, she has, um, you know, HBO comes to her, and if you've seen like some of the Succession billboards where you have
Mm-hmm.
like the whole cast, like she made that, and it is massively complicated and something that AI cannot do. So if you have already sunk some time into that, then that is also an advantage. But maybe AI gets you, halfway there, and then you have the expertise that you've built. So I don't think
Right.
we're necessarily, wasting our time with all of this. It's all additive. And if it's something that appeals to you, and like we said earlier, if it, hits a pain point that you have, then it's absolutely worth it, even if something is going to change.
Yeah, that's great. And I think it's important to realize that, a highly skilled human expert in a certain thing probably can outdo the computer in a lot of areas. But if you're not that expert in that thing, if the computer can get you 95% there, you're probably farther along than you would have been trying to do it yourself manually. And so,
Yeah.
if you're not an expert at portrait retouching, use the tools that can help you get most of the way there. Especially, I mean, if you're not that expert, you're probably not holding yourself out there as a professional portrait retoucher. And this is maybe just your fun family photos from the weekend. And if you can get them better automatically, great. Is it as good
Yeah.
as a professional retoucher could have done manually? Probably not. Does it need that
But do
level
you
of
need
attention? No. And so, I think that's, sometimes where some of the people that want to resist new developments and, automation and things like that, is that they will find the cases where legitimately the automation doesn't do a great job, or fails in some way. And they will point to that, and it's like, well, look, it couldn't handle that particular situation. And it's like, well, yes, we threw 500 situations at it, and 7 of them didn't turn out great. Are you like 98.5% awesome on everything you do personally? That's a pretty good percentage. And if we identify that, 7 of them need some retouching or fixing or human attention, cool. So we have gone almost an hour, which is longer than I was planning, but this has been a great conversation. And we did not go down the generative AI rabbit hole. I was glad we stayed not, we talked about it a little bit, but we did not get too obsessed with that. I feel like too many of the photography AI conversations lately have all just been about generating images and all of the hoopla around that.
How soon am I going to be put out of work?
How soon am I going to be put out of work? I think I'm going to wrap this up as far as my final thought, and then I'll get one from you as well. I mean, I would say, for photographers that have questions around this thing, I would say just pay attention to whatever photography news sources you follow, whether that's blogs, podcasts. I'll plug Jeff and I both have email newsletters. Jeff's is at photo-ai.com. Mine, you can go to techphotoguy.com and subscribe right from the homepage. But magazines, news articles, wherever you get your photo news, you're going to be hearing about AI. Pay attention to it. Don't obsess over it. Don't freak out thinking that you need to be living and breathing it 24/7. If it piques your interest because it sounds like it's relevant to the photography that you're doing, dive further into that. If it has no interest to you whatsoever, don't lose any sleep over that. It's part of the current photo world. It's part of the future photo world. It will be like any other technology that we all use. Just embrace it. And I think that's kind of my final thought. What's your parting thought here, Jeff?
I totally agree. I think people need to remember that, the camera that you had 2 weeks ago is still going to make good photos. Whether you throw AI at it or not. And also, regardless, the AI is going to be coming into all sorts of different areas of your photographic life. I mean, we didn't even get into like on camera AI stuff.
Right.
The super snazzy, autofocus that will immediately lock on to the eye of a flying bird. Like, that's AI. But you don't need to know anything about that. You just need to know that, wow, this is really cool. I turn on this feature and suddenly a lot of my images are a lot more in focus, or more of my images are in focus than, they used to be. So, it's technology that, I say this and it sort of sounds like the AI is making me say this, but it is technology that is by and large helping us in specific ways. It's automating things, it's speeding up things. And except for generative AI, which is sort of on the side, but it's still in its infancy, you're still a photographer that can go and make amazing images, AI or not. Right. And it's cool stuff. And part of the reason you and I are into this, because it's just, neat being on this edge and seeing what it can do. And, professionally, it's so that I can write about it and share. And, that's all good. But when I take my camera and I go out somewhere to go shooting, AI is not usually top of mind. I'm focused on what's in front of the camera. How can I get a good shot of, this person who's posing for me? Am I going to get the right lighting conditions in this landscape sunset? Like, those fundamentals still apply. Mm-hmm. And so I think people don't need to get hung up on it. they can look at it as this cool extra thing that can help them in certain ways.
Right. And we're not using AI for the sake of AI. We're using it for a purpose, for the images that we're making for ourselves or for our clients. And
Yeah.
that's ultimately what it's all about. It's about making the photo, and it's a way we can use some technology to help us with that, but it's ultimately just about making the photo. That's a great point to wrap up. Thank you again, Jeff, for this conversation. Like I said, you can find out more about me at techphotoguy.com. Jeff is over at jeffcarlson.com. And keep in touch with our photography efforts, our AI efforts. We don't have robots write our newsletters for us quite yet. We'll let you know if that's coming. But other than that, thanks everyone for tuning in. I'll have the replay here on YouTube as well. I will flesh out the notes and links and all that below to everything we've talked about. And until next time we chat about another fun topic like this, take care, everyone.
Take care. And also give us your questions, because we only really touched on a small portion of everything is possible. So either whether it's through the newsletters or email or whatever, contact us, because there are a lot of questions, and there are a lot more things that we didn't cover. So send us your questions. We want to know what you're thinking about too.
Good call. Good call. And as we talked about a few minutes ago, everything is going to be obsolete and everything will be new here in a couple months anyway. So we can chat about it all again then. So, all
exactly.
right.
What are we even doing here? I don't know.
Yeah. Who knows what got
Aaron,
announced? Who knows what got announced in the hour we were on the air that we're already out of date on.
Seriously.
All right. Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.